Even if you've got hundreds of hours in Zero Dawn, there are some secret tricks and advanced mechanics I bet you didn't know. Like during a specific side quest called Luck of the Hunt, the drop rate for boar skins is dramatically increased inside the quest area. Actually, it seems like the drop rate for all animal skins and bones is increased, and even machine drops too. So while this quest is active, you can easily get a bunch of resources needed for pouch upgrades. You might even want to consider leaving this quest unfinished for most of your playthrough so you can come back for easy farming. You've probably come across some collectibles like metal flowers, ancient vessels, Banuk figures, vantage points, and blue gleam. And you might have also already found the maps for sale at merchants to help you locate these. But the maps only give you a search area, not an exact location. So to help zero in on the collectible you're looking for, you can drop a waypoint marker down on its map icon. This won't lead you straight to it, but the flag marker will then be displayed at the collectible's actual elevation. So when one is up above or below you, for example, this can help a lot in tracking it down. Shout out to my friend Justin for pointing that one out. But let's dive into combat tips. You know when you're fighting a machine and sometimes they fall over stunned for a moment with this triple star icon? That's called a knockdown, and there are actually reliable ways to make those happen. See, knockdowns actually work very similar to building up elemental states. You need to build up enough knockdown before the full knockdown state gets triggered, but we don't get an icon to show the buildup happening like we do with elemental states. Each ammo type applies some amount of knockdown power, just like elemental ammo types apply a certain amount of buildup. But with knockdown, these stats are hidden. From my testing, precision and hardpoint arrows do have a decent amount of knockdown power, so you can definitely use these to trigger knockdowns. Precision arrows have more knockdown power, but sharp shot bows are pretty slow to fire without some handling coils, so you might find hardpoint arrows are easier to use. I've also found that the Ice Rail ice cannon ammo actually has a lot of knockdown power. You can get knockdowns on big machines in about 4 shots with that thing. Plus, it of course can deal a lot of damage and apply frost buildup at the same time. So the Ice Rail might actually be one of the best ways to leverage knockdown in Zero Dawn. With the right coils, you can freeze and knock down a machine around the same time, all while dealing some solid damage. And then the knockdown will set you up for an easy shot at even more damage, which will be boosted by the brittle state. But Ice Rail ammo is expensive, so you're probably going to be using precision and hardpoint arrows for knockdown much more often. The other critical thing you have to know about knockdown is that in order to trigger one, the key is to hit machines in the legs. The official strategy guide shows us that machines' bodies are split into zones, and when we reach specific knockdown thresholds on those different zones, we trigger different effects. Hitting machines in the body can trigger staggers, which can interrupt their attack animations. And if machines are running towards or away from you, you can also cause them to tumble, which you may have actually triggered by accident without realizing it wasn't just a random thing. But for pretty much all medium and large machines, to get a full knockdown, you've got to hit them with enough knockdown power in the legs specifically. Small machines are easier. You can hit them pretty much anywhere on their body except their head to get a knockdown. But with medium and large machines, it's gotta be in the legs. Each machine also has different thresholds for how much knockdown power is required before it keels over. I haven't done it for Zero Dawn yet, but I did compile all the Forbidden West machine knockdown zones and their thresholds in a spreadsheet, and the machines that show up in both games have identical or similar values. I'll link that spreadsheet below. But in practice, it's not worth remembering all these threshold values. You're just going to hit machines in the legs enough times with precision or hardpoint arrows until you get a knockdown. And it does take multiple shots. Even with a purple sharp shot bow, it'll often take about 10 or 12 precision arrows to trigger it on a big machine. Though knockdown power does scale with impact damage. So if you boost your impact damage with coils, it boosts knockdown power as well. It doesn't boost it very much though, so you might go from 10 or 12 precision arrows to 7 or 8 to trigger a knockdown, even with maxed out coils. You can stack knockdown power by triple notching arrows though, so that's nice. But you should know that knockdown buildup will degrade over time, just like elemental state buildup. So you don't want to go too long between shots on the legs, or else you'll lose the knockdown you've been building up. That's why it can feel like you're just never getting them for some reason. A tactic I like to use that incorporates knockdowns is freezing a machine, and then whenever I can't get a good angle on a component for increased damage, I default to aiming my shot at the legs, so I can at least work towards a knockdown since I couldn't get more damage. But there's actually a second type of knockdown, and that one doesn't degrade over time. Explosions from blastling bombs, tripcaster wires, and some other types of explosions will apply what's called explosive knockdown, which works a little differently from the regular knockdown that you apply with other ammo types. In addition to the buildup not degrading like regular knockdown, you also don't need to worry about aiming for the legs. Explosive knockdown can be applied by hitting any part of a machine's body. So with those two benefits combined, it's overall simpler and easier to trigger knockdowns using explosive ammo. But Aloy also has a couple of other knockdown tools. The first one is a spear heavy attack. So doing a heavy attack to knock down a machine and then following up with a critical hit, or utilizing the knockdown window in some other way, like targeting a component for increased damage, is a pretty strong tactic, especially against smaller machines early on. Her other knockdown tool is the mount. Simply running machines down while riding a strider or another sort of mount will apply a lot of knockdown. And you can also do a heavy attack while mounted, which applies a solid amount of knockdown as well. Machine knockdown thresholds also don't scale with difficulty level, so you can use knockdown tactics just as effectively on ultra hard as you can on story mode. However, the spear's knockdown power is significantly reduced on ultra hard, so you'll find it's much harder to trigger knockdowns on ultra hard with the spear specifically. Leveraging knockdowns is a more subtle mechanic, but I'm sure you're familiar with using a ropecaster to tie down machines. But a lot of players don't realize you can actually also use them to tear off components very easily. See, when ropes break, they apply tear damage to whatever they're attached to. Oftentimes that's just going to be armor plates on a machine's body, which isn't very helpful. But if you manage to attach ropes to components, you can get the added benefit of ripping them off when the ropes break, or at least making some progress towards that by applying some tear damage. This lesser-known ropecaster mechanic helps balance out the fact that the tie-down state quickly degrades when you deal damage. Of course, it's not always going to be easy to land ropes on components when you're tying a machine down. Usually you're just focused on getting the ropes on anywhere you can to get that robot down. But you can attach more ropes after it's immobilized. The additional ropes won't extend the tie-down state, but it's much easier to anchor them on components you want to yank off this way. Then, when you do eventually deal damage, the machine will get ripped apart, which is pretty satisfying. If you want to leverage this aspect of ropecasters, you'll probably want to boost the tear stat of the ropes by coiling it with tear coils. Ideally, you'd use some tear coils with handling as a secondary stat, or vice versa. Let's blast through some simpler mechanics I want to make sure you know, and then we'll get back to the more advanced ones. You've probably noticed the alarms in Bandit camps that let the bandits call in a bunch of reinforcements if you don't disable them. Instead of sneaking up to them, the simplest thing is to either shoot them with an arrow or even just throw a rock at them. You can easily and safely disable them this way. A few weapons like the ice rail and rattlers hamper Aloy's movement pretty badly, but you can counter that by using them while mounted. Plus, you'll get a slow-mo effect when aiming, like concentration, as an extra bonus for using them this way. In combat, you'll often see me and other players jumping before firing a weapon. That's because I'm leveraging the Hunter Reflexes skill to get a free concentration-like effect. It can certainly be a bit harder to aim with the additional motion from the jump, but if you can learn how to do this, it lets you get around a limitation of the normal concentration mechanic, which is that you can only trigger concentration when the gauge is completely full. The most common way to leverage Hunter Reflexes is by jumping, but it does also trigger if you aim while sliding or when mounted. But if you're going to try to use it while sliding, with a Banuk bow in particular, you'll probably want the bow coiled with a lot of handling. Otherwise, there won't be enough time during the slide to get the full overdraw, which you should always be aiming for with the Banuk bows. Unlike all other bows, the Banuk ones have a damage penalty for releasing your shot before the overdraw, and that penalty will actually make them deal less damage than their shadow counterparts. Which reminds me, in Zero Dawn, tap firing any bow except the Banuk bows is totally viable, and it's actually often a much faster way to build up elemental states or apply damage. In Forbidden West, most weapons get a significant damage penalty when tap fired, just like the Banuk bows. But in Zero Dawn, you'll get full damage on all other bows, even when spamming arrows as fast as possible. This is particularly helpful with low rarity weapons and weaker ammo, like early on with fire arrows, for example. It's much more effective to just tap fire arrows really fast to build up the burning state instead of fully drawing each one. I'm sure you're also familiar with the double and triple shot skills that let you knock and fire multiple arrows at once, which helps build up elemental states and deal damage faster. But I think a lot of players don't realize you can actually preload multi-knocks on multiple bows at once. So for example, you can knock 3 hardpoint arrows on a hunter bow and then switch to a sharp shot bow to knock 3 precision arrows on that. Then you can switch to a war bow and load up 3 frost arrows to freeze a machine. And then once you've got it frozen, you can go back to your triple hardpoint and precision arrows and they'll still be triple notched. So when you prep this way, you can unleash a lot of damage fast. The only limitation here is that you can only do this for 1 ammo type at a time on each bow. So you can't triple notch both fire and hardpoint arrows on the same hunter bow, for example. And if you accidentally switch to a different ammo on the bow you've preloaded, the triple notch will get reset. So you just have to be a bit careful scrolling around the weapon wheel. Triple notching can be a bit slow though, and you're more vulnerable because Aloy's mobility is reduced while reloading. But we can combat that a bit. You don't actually have to hold aim the entire time Aloy's knocking an arrow. Aiming is the thing that hinders your mobility, but you only need to aim to get the arrow knocking animation started. Once Aloy's already started knocking an arrow, you can release aim and she'll finish while you're free to move around normally. So you can quickly aim, hit reload to start the knocking animation, let go of aim for a moment and move around freely while she finishes, and then repeat if needed. I admit it feels a little awkward to do at first, but if you get used to doing your triple notches this way, you can stay much more mobile in the heat of combat. Of course, the other thing that helps with keeping up the pace is boosting the handling stat of your weapons with handling coils. Handling makes both reloading and drawing faster. For most weapons, you'll probably want to prioritize another type of coil, but adding one good handling coil or finding and using coils with handling as a secondary stat is definitely helpful. Coil and weave stats in general can be a bit confusing in Zero Dawn because they're given as percentages, but the math doesn't always work out like you'd expect. That's mostly down to the fact that the stat numbers we see are rounded, but under the hood they actually have a lot of decimal values. Like, you can have 2 coils that say they give you a 30% boost, but one of them is actually 29.5% and the other is 30.4%. And you won't know that until you actually socket the coil on a weapon with some other coils and check the math. I'm not saying it's worth doing that, I just want to make sure you're aware of the deceptive rounding. That's actually true with damage numbers too, by the way. If you see 30 damage, it might actually be 29.875 or something like that. And the enemy will actually take that fractional damage, but you'll just be shown a round number. But with coils, what you should keep in mind is that you can actually overcoil a weapon. What I mean by that is you can equip coils with boosts so high that combined, they actually go past the maximum value the stat can have. Elemental, damage, and tear all max out at plus 150%, and handling maxes out at plus 200%. So equipping coils that add up to more than that doesn't do anything. At that point, you're basically wasting a bit of the coil. You've probably seen how these little hash marks next to each weapon's stats fill up green as you equip coils that boost the stat. If you equip coils that push beyond the maximum hash mark, you won't gain any additional benefit. The max values of coils you can farm are plus 50% for damage, tear, and elemental, and plus 67% for handling. So on a weapon with 3 coil slots, you can't really exceed the caps anyway, but on an adept weapon with 4 slots, you can. This only really becomes a problem in New Game Plus in the end game when you're dealing with lots of really good coils. But if you're optimizing your weapons, you'll sometimes find it's better to actually go with a coil that has a lower value on its primary stat, so you can gain some benefit from a secondary or tertiary stat on another coil, like extra handling, for example. You should also know that even though it'll show the tear stat increasing, tear blast arrows on a sharp shot bow don't actually get their tear stat boosted by tear coils. Tear blast arrows always do the same amount of tear damage no matter what, so it's definitely not worth trying to boost them. We covered it briefly in my essential tips video, but another weird thing with coils is how you should go about optimizing for burning damage over time. Damage over time is the accumulation of the damage ticks you see when an enemy is burning, and it's a good way to apply passive damage in combat. But to maximize it, you actually need to mix fire and damage coils. See, fire and damage coils both boost the strength of burn damage over time, but when you coil with all of one or the other, the boost maxes out at 2.5x, or plus 150%, which you can get with 3 max stat coils. That's the limit for tear, elemental, and damage we mentioned earlier. But when you mix fire and damage coils, their boosts multiply together instead of adding. You add coils of the same type together, but you multiply coils of different types. If you take that to the extreme where we have coils giving us plus 150% on both fire and damage, the total boost will be plus 525%, or 6.25x. But let's ignore all the math and I'll make this really simple. If you're trying to maximize burn damage over time, the rule of thumb is to try to strike an even balance between the total amount you're boosting fire and damage. Having an even mix of both results in more damage over time from the burning state than going all in on either one. It's also worth noting that this multiplicative boost applies to what I prefer to call the elemental impact damage of your ammo. That's just the first number you see with the hit that triggers the elemental state. Now in practice, I personally like to lean towards having a little more of a damage boost. That way my hardpoint arrows can be better optimized for damage and I still get solid damage over time from burning. However, this does make it a little slower to build up the burn state. That's something that fire coils do that damage ones don't. Fire coils will boost the burn buildup, but I can always tap fire to apply burn buildup fast. Shout out to my friend Arg for helping me get all the details on coils in here. Now, just like you can overcoil weapons, you can also overweave outfits. All outfits have a hard max of 100 for all the elemental damage resistance stats, and 70 for melee and range damage resistance. It's confusing because a lot of the outfits show hash marks that indicate their max values are higher or lower than these limits. But these really are the hard limits on all outfits. For the most part though, you're going to need some top shelf coils and weaves to start hitting these limits. Of course, big machine hunting is always a classic way to farm purple mods since they'll drop 3 at a time. But there are also a few neat tricks to get good coils much faster. Plus there are tricks for getting lots of shards fast too. I'll put the video on all that right here when it's ready. But for now, you'll want to check out the purple mod farming trick we covered in my essential tips video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you there in just a second.